Hello, this is Lewis describing how to replace the SD card in your PredictWin DataHub. The first thing is, why would you want to replace the SD card? Well, the DataHub uses the SD card to store position reports, logging information for tracking, and also for tracking or logging NMEA data as well. Additionally, if you've got predict mail, data that is transferred from the mail server is stored on the DataHub. And so the SD card is extremely important when you're offshore and collecting position reports without an internet connection. Those position reports are stored on the SD card. And when you come to shore within cell phone range or internet access via Wi-Fi, those position reports are uploaded to PredictWin, to the PredictWin tracking portal for you. Again, all that is stored in the SD card. So we found that users, especially those that have NMEA logging enabled with many instruments on their boat, can run out of disk space. The hub is manufactured with a 4 gigabyte SD card, and users are finding that that's not large enough. And so replacing the SD card on the DataHub is quite simple, and we'll go over the process of doing that. Now, before I dive into the mechanics of replacing the SD card, I want to discuss SD card or SD memory or flash memory technology. Let me just start by saying that not all flash memory is made the same. So when you buy your flash card or your replacement flash card, there's a number of different technologies, and the technology that you select is important. And so I'll just give you a quick tutorial on the flash memory so that you have a little bit of knowledge before you go out and you buy your replacement SD card. So typically, or historically, there's been 3 different kinds of flash memory. SLC, which stands for single level cell technology. MLC for multi-level cell technology. TLC for triple level cell technology. And more recently, QLC for quadruple level cell technology, and something called 3D NAND. Now, these cells, basically, each cell on the NAND flash will store a given amount of data. And SLC, where you have a single level cell, you only have 2 states per cell on your memory, and therefore the number of bits that you can store per cell is 1 bit, and consequently the density of the card is fairly low. So you'll find that SLC memory has the lowest density, or the lowest amount of storage per card size than any of the other technologies. QLC, on the other hand, has 4 bits per cell, or 16 states per cell, and consequently much denser. And so you can have huge amounts of storage on your SD card. So if you buy a 512 gigabyte or a 1 terabyte SD card, that's probably going to be QLC, again, because you need to have the storage capacity and the density. Now, the price also varies dramatically because the storage technology, the denser you can have it, again, the cheaper your per gigabyte of storage will be, and therefore price affects the kind of technology that you'll have available to you based on the size you specify. Now, not all technologies are the same. SLC, if you take a look at SLC, the voltage differential between the cells is quite large. Now, before I dive into that, let me just say that NAND flash memory will wear out. And so what happens is the more you write to it, or when you write to it, you actually physically change the media, and eventually the media will fail. If you take a look at SLC memory, the voltage differential between the 2 states is quite large, and consequently the memory is very good for long-lasting applications. If you take a look at QLC or TLC, the voltage differential between the states is much smaller, and consequently the failure rate will be much higher as a function of the number of writes that you have in the technology. And so to give you an example, SLC typically, this SLC cell typically is good for 100,000 write cycles. MLC, which has 4 states or 2 bits per cell, is typically good for 10,000 cycles. TLC, again, which is 3 bits per cycle, is 3,000 write cycles. And QLC typically is 1,000 write cycles before you start before the media starts to fail. So again, reliability is going to be a function of the kind of technology that you use. Now let me also add that historically these memories have been made in 2-dimensional grids, and more recently what's happened is these states or these cells have been stacked in 3-dimensional, and so that's called 3D NAND. In 3D NAND, because you're stacking all the electronics or the transistors in a stacked 3-dimensional format, the memory is much denser, and consequently you can fit many more bits per gigabyte of storage. Cost goes down. And the speed and reliability actually for the 3-dimensional models are pretty good. And so when you shop around for these, you'll see these kinds of memory, and you need to take them into consideration when purchasing your memory. Also note that SLC historically has been much faster than TLC and MLC. Again, because you can write to these bits much quicker because the number of states per cell is much smaller. Whereas for the other technologies, the write technology is going to be slower, although the read technology is pretty comparable between all of these different flash memory technologies. So let me just put up the data sheet for the card that we include with the DataHub. The card that we include is called an industrial card. It's really good to purchase the industrial cards because the industrial cards are really designed for higher performance and higher durability, whereas the consumer cards, which are used in cameras and media that is not going to have a lot of writes on it, typically are less expensive and will wear out much quicker. And so we recommend that you purchase an industrial card if you can. We use a Transcend card called Super MLC 220. And the card that we include in the DataHub for you, it's a 4 gigabyte guy. And if you come down here, you will see that the specifications for the card itself. You'll see that basically the write speed is 80 megabytes per second. I'm sorry, the read speed. The write speed is 46 megabytes per second, and you can write 300 terabytes of data onto that card before it will fail. So that's a lot of writes, and so this is a very reliable card, which is why we've included it. But the size is limited to 4 gigabytes, and as I said, many users are finding that to be quite limiting. So when you go shopping for the SD cards, I recommend that you take a look at the data sheets. And so, for example, here's Western Digital SD cards, different models using different technologies. So, for example, you see that they've got an SLC card. The SLC card is good for 8 to 64 gigabytes. Again, limited in size. Again, because you're using a 2-dimensional grid with only 2 states per cell. Take a look at the number of writes. So you can write, quite a few terabytes to that card before you wear it out. And then again, the speeds are really very good as well. They also have an MLC card. Here it is. Again, the density goes up to 128 gigabytes in this particular case, and the number of writes goes down again because you've got a medium that has many more states per cell than the SLC. So here we are. They have a TLC based card as well. The TLC based card is using 3D NAND, so that's the stacked version. The number of writes is really quite good for this. So for these cards, it's double that of the MLC cards. And again, the reads and write speeds are really good as well. And so again, the 3D technology is much better for sustainability than the two-dimensional technology. But again, look at the specs and see what the failure rate is going to be for these. Let me just give you another example. So here's a SD card from another manufacturer. This is Viking. They have a 3D SLC card, again limited in size to 16 gigabytes maximum. It's in a 3D stack mode, although I don't have the performance figures here. They're probably pretty good. They have a TLC version, again in a 3D stack version from a company called TSB is making the NAND flash, and again 32, 64, 128. And then they've got an MLC traditional two-dimensional made by SanDisk, and these are the different sizes that they provide. So when you buy your SD card, look at the technology that they're using, look at the number of writes that that the card will support before it fails, and then pick a one that is of specific size for your application. All right, so let's move on to swapping out the SD card. Swapping out the SD card is pretty simple. We will take the unit apart, replace the SD card, and then put it back together. When we power it on, the unit will automatically detect a new card and it'll format it and it'll install it for you. I don't have a larger card with me, but I have another one of these 4 gigabyte SanDisk cards here. So we'll just swap the one that's in here for the one that's there, and you'll see the process is exactly the same regardless of what micro SD card you use. So the first thing you do is you turn your hub upside down, and you'll find 4 little rubber pads on the bottom of feet. And so I have a small screwdriver here. You just go in here and pry the rubber feet off and put them in a safe place so that you don't lose them. And under those rubber feet, you will find some Phillips screws. So we'll go ahead and take those out. All right. Okay, and then you'll see the Phillips screws are sitting there. I can go ahead and take it apart right now, but before I do that, there's some nuts in here that hold up against the case. So the one for the N2 K bus, I'll just go ahead and unscrew that one. They're just usually finger tight. They don't need to be tight. You can actually leave them off if you wanted to. They don't serve much of a purpose. They're supposed to hold the connectors close against the case, but again, it doesn't matter. And then the same is true for the one that goes with the GPS antenna. So we'll just remove those and set those aside. Get the little washer off. Then we'll use our screwdriver to remove the 4 Phillips screws on the bottom. And then we'll pop the lid. I'm just going to move the lid to the side. And here's the main board. You can just lift the board out and it'll just slide out. Turn the board right side up and you'll see the SD card right here on the right hand side of the board with the connectors facing away from you. Now put your finger, this is a cage type connector, so put your finger on it and slide it back towards you. So the direction of motion is in this direction. And as soon as you do that, you'll see that the SD card pops open. You then remove the old SD card, put the new SD card in. Now putting the SD card in is fairly tricky. You need to seat it in there and make sure that the small connectors on the bottom side of the card, these guys, are over the pins. So I normally put my finger on it and shake it just to make sure that there's no motion. And then carefully pull the lid back towards you and then flip it up. Okay. So again, it needs to be towards you and then push down and then push away from you. And then that snaps the card into place. Snaps the card into place so that it stays motionless on the card. All right, now we're ready to assemble things back together. So we just do the reverse operation, put the card in, right? Take the lid, put the lid on, screw in the connectors, put the feet back on. Put the rubber O-ring back over the N2K connector. Screw the bulkhead nut back on. Again, it does not need to be tight. Put the washer on the GPS SMA connector. Screw the nut back in. And voila. New SD card. Power it on, the hub will detect it, format it for you, and then set everything up to use that new SD card. So that's what I'll have for you now. Thanks for paying attention and listening, and we'll see you next time.